Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to review this album from Bob Dylan, John Wesley Harding. I've been meaning to review this for quite a while, really. I'm not sure why it's taken me so long to get round to it. It's one of my very favourite Bob albums. It says 1968 on the label, although I think it might have been available in the last few days of December. So what's remarkable about this album is it's Bob's, well, first of all, it's Bob's first album release for about 18 months, since Blonde on Blonde. And he'd been out of action. He'd had this motorbike accident, and then he'd recorded with the band in a friend's basement, in what became the Basement Tapes. And remarkably, although Bob recorded several classic songs during those sessions, such as Tears of Rage, I Shall Be Released, You Ain't Going Nowhere, to name but three, he didn't release any of them at the time, and it took until 1975 when they put out the Basement Tapes. So I think the band were expecting that the next album from Bob would feature that material, or at least have them in the studio, but they're not to be seen on this album, although Robbie Robertson was asked apparently to do some overdubs onto the material once it had been recorded, but he listened to the tapes and thought, I can't improve on this. So it might have been interesting had he done that, but I think probably not. I think he was right to just leave them. It's a very bare sound, but it's very effective, and it's basically, for the most part, just a three-man band, with Bob mostly on guitar, playing piano on a couple of tracks, Charles McCoy on bass, and Kenny Buttrey on drums. And then the only other musician to feature is Pete Drake, who plays steel guitar on the last two tracks. And I read an interview that Bob had not intended for this to be such a simple sound. You know, he probably thought there maybe should be some keyboards and stuff on it, but the way it turned out was this very simple format and very simple, homey cover. Bob had retreated from the limelight and was leading a pretty sedate country life, living in a nice house out of town, and hanging out with his friends and not touring. And he wouldn't really tour, apart from a couple of one-offs. He wouldn't really tour for, well, the next big tour of his was the early 74 tour with the band, which resulted in the Before the Flood album. By the way, I'm recording this outside because it has stopped raining, but if it does start, I'm going to have to stop. So what is interesting about this album is, another thing interesting about it is it's a complete antidote to all the psychedelia which had been going on in the rest of the music scene. And as if Bob had said, well, other people may be doing that, but it's not my scene. And I think he's on record in saying he doesn't really like it, and he didn't really care for Sgt. Pepper and hadn't really attempted to do anything like that. So credit to him for just sticking to his muse and just recording a beautiful acoustic album. And it must have been quite a shock when it came out, because his voice is not got the exaggeration that it had on the Blonde on Blonde, and as I say, none of Al Cooper's stuff on it, and just a more laid back, pared back sound. But songwriting, it's just a fantastic album. There aren't many albums which I think could make a claim to being the greatest Bob Dylan albums, like maybe 4 or 5, and this is one of them in my opinion. It's just the sheer songwriting quality, the consistency is quite staggering. Another interesting thing to say about this sleeve is if you turn it upside down and look at this tree very closely, you can see the heads of the Beatles. And I tried it just now with a magnifying glass, and they're kind of there, or at least George and John are there. Paul and Ringo are a little less obvious. But apparently the photographer didn't plan this at all, and it was pointed out to him, so he got the master version of this photograph out and took a look. And sure enough, he could see it. He said, if you want to see it, you can see it. And he was amazed as anyone. But I don't think it was... I think it's just a tree, actually. But it's quite interesting theory or whatever. Because the Beatles had mentioned the Rolling Stones on the Sgt. Pepper cover, and then the Rolling Stones had included little pictures of each Beatle in a bubble on the Satanic Majesty's Request cover. So Bob Dylan was on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, of course, so it's possible that Bob had a little joke and put them in there at the top of the tree, but as often with trees, if you look at it upside down or at night, if you look at the silhouette of a tree, it can look like almost anything you imagine it to be. So anyway, I'm not sure who these people are on the cover with him. They're not the musicians for sure. Pretty sure anyway. So tried and trusted Nashville musicians. I think they're from Nashville. Pete Drake certainly masterminded the Bo Coops of Blues album later for Ringo in 1970. So what can be said for the songs? By the way, I read these sleeve notes, and they're just as incomprehensible now as they were when I first read them. It's about three kings going to visit someone called Frank and saying, Mr. Dylan has produced a new album, can you help us open it, or something. It's quite amusing. I'm not sure if the Frank in here is the same as Frankie Lee as in the song, but anyway, John Wesley Harding is the opener, and it's a great song about an outlaw. And here come the planes. Maybe with a mic I can get away with it, actually. So the title track sets the tone for the album with this three-man band, guitar, bass, and drums, and a very good song about this outlaw and good words. And must have been just so great to have Dylan back after such a long absence, because 18 months in the 60s was long. I mean, nowadays it's nothing. But if you think in the 60s, you know, the Beatles and the Stones, Dylan had been releasing, you know, about 2 albums a year at this stage. So to have nothing for 18 months was quite traumatic, I would have thought. Anyway, so he's back with this great opening track, and then as I went out one morning to breathe the air around Tom Paine, I'm not sure what these words are meaning. You can comment in the comments. I'm sure people experts on the lyrics. Just suffice to say that if they're not always comprehensible, they're very good lyrics, as in most cases on a Dylan album, and telling a story. And I'm not sure how much is autobiographical and how much is not. I Dreamed I Saw St. Augustine is another kind of dreamy ballad, which he would do on the following album, Nashville Skyline, but here he's singing in his normal voice. He hasn't gone all nasal yet. St. Augustine is the Saint Augustine, and also it's a very nice old town in Florida, which I had the pleasure of visiting in January of this year. All Along the Watchtower, famously covered by Jimi Hendrix, who does a great version of it, and maybe is the definitive version of this song. Certainly Bob appreciated it and said that was the sound I would have gone for if he could do it again. He would have gone for a heavier sound, I think. But on here, it's quite pleasant. Maybe a little bit underdeveloped. Frankie Lee and Judas Priest, the Ballad of, a very amusing song about two best friends who get in trouble together, and there's all the mysterious characters like the neighbor boy and wandering around muttering nothing is revealed, and if you see a stranger, help him with his load, and don't go mistaking paradise for that home across the road. I love this track. It's I don't think he's ever done this in concert. In fact, I don't think he's hardly, apart from I'll Be Your Baby Tonight, I don't think he's done many of these songs in concert at all. All Along the Watchtower, of course, he has. Finishes with that most of the time these days. And then Drifter's Escape is another mysterious tale of some drifter, and then the thunderbolt hits the theatre at the end of the song and the drifter sneaks away. Again, no idea what it's about, but it's quite amusing. Maybe melodically it's a little bit one-dimensional, but it's pretty good. And then Dear Landlord, open side 2, and it's absolute outstanding track, probably my favourite on the album. And I have to say, brilliant piano playing from Bob. He's not like an extrovert like Nicky Hopkins or something, but he knows how to play to the requirements of the song, and his left-hand work in particular on this song I think is gorgeous, and he should play the piano more often, although he had played it quite a bit before, Ballad of a Thin Man, and quite a bit of New Morning he was playing piano on later. But on the whole, I don't think maybe he should play even more. That's just my opinion, because he's a pretty decent pianist. I Am a Lonesome Hobo is a nice ballad. Oh, Jesus. Nice ballad with interesting words. And then I Pity the Poor Immigrant is another slower song, and he's singing it slightly strangely, slight little bit of a start of the nasal voice, but not the same as Nashville Skyline. Good tune, and I like it. It's not my favourite, and The Wicked Messenger is again an interesting track, but it's not my favourite. But the album finishes very strongly with Down Along the Cove, which is kind of some light relief after the slightly heavier material up to now, and it's just a joyous love song, and again featuring Bob on piano, and very effectively just playing this boogie piano, and Pete Drake really adds some colour to it with his steel guitar. So, by the way, the record is on, my copy is on this orange CBS English copy, I think. So then the album finishes with I'll Be Your Baby Tonight, which is a glorious ballad. Beautiful tune, and beautifully delivered by this band. Pete Drake featured again. But the only gripe I have is it fades out very severely at the end after the harmonica, in the middle of the harmonica solo. And could have done with an extra minute or two, because it's the kind of song which you just want to go on forever, really, and it's very short. I think it's not even 2 minutes. I didn't time it, but you just feel a bit cheated when it's faded out at the end, and I'm not sure what Bob Johnston, who produced the album, what he was thinking, but because it's not as if it was a particularly long album, so no real reason for that, and a little bit of an unsatisfactory end, but it's a glorious song, and it's one of Bob's best ever love songs. He's written a few over the years, so as I say, this album is in my top 4 or 5 Bob Dylan albums probably, and when you're in the mood to play it, when you're in the mood for this type of band, you know, the laid back sound he gets with Kenny Buttrey and Charles McCoy, it's just glorious. And thank you for watching. See you next time.